Welcome to episode 110 of the Gut Wrench podcast. Thank you all so much for joining me. This week we took a look at, believe it or not the WWE, not AEW, not wrestling in a hole. I should say actually wrestling in a hole, because Joe Rogan has always said this. If you want to be a good MMA fighter, if you want to be a good or even a decent enough mixed martial artist, if you was to look at a pyramid of mixed martial arts, wrestling would be at the bottom. And that's not a bad thing. That just means that wrestling would be one of the pillars, one of the base as far as the base as far as that pyramid goes. For those of you wondering why I'm talking about MMA, or perhaps you're startled, oh wow, a wrestling podcast is talking about MMA? Oh, wow, what even are we doing today? So we're going to be looking at UFC 133. And honestly, I thought that this would be a little bit more entertaining, but it's not. I hate to break that to you. It's absolutely, positively not that entertaining. Some of these notes I probably won't even be able to read because, okay, like for instance, here's the co-main event, right? And for some reason, I thought that they were going in order. Like, this part makes no sense. So, the poster for UFC 133 had Tito Ortiz beside of, Rashad Evans. They're two light heavyweight, fighters, for those of you not aware. And to my knowledge, I never really seen Tito in the light heavyweight division. I always thought that he was in the heavyweight division because I remember him going up against people like Rampage Jackson, who is in the, if I remember correctly, the heavyweight division. Maybe I'm wrong, because they did make an assumption, they did make like a mention to the fact that Rashad Evans had faced off against, who is also in the light heavyweight division, had faced off against Rampage Jackson. So, why do I remember Tito being heavyweight? It doesn't matter, I guess. But anyway, the opponent for a Vitor Belfort is AKIYAMA, which I'm assuming is Akiyama, like, Akiyama. So that's what I'll probably be calling him, but some of these people, their names, like, I'd never heard of Akiyama. I didn't know who that was. I'd heard of Vitor Belfort. But this was the co-main event, right? But somehow on Apple Plus TV or Apple TV or whatever that I downloaded this from, this was the second match. And what I mean by that is, if they were to put them in order, and I've talked about this before, in professional wrestling, how the card is presented is how the audience is meant to watch it, right? So you wouldn't watch the World Heavyweight Championship match first, and then after that, the Intercontinental Championship match, and then the Tag Team Championship match, and then the United States Championship match, and then the number one contenders match for the previous, or one of the previous matches, and then the number one contenders match for the previous match, and then after that the Hardcore Championship match, and then after that you would watch it Oh man, I can't even think if it's ascending or descending. But you would watch it if I was to put them in descending order. The last match that you would watch would be the World Heavyweight Championship match, which, if I was to put them in ascending order, would be at the top of the card. That's why it would be the last match that you would watch. But anyway, the position of the library is what I'm talking about. The library that I downloaded this from, for one reason or another, had this Akiyama versus Vitor Belfort, which is the co-main event, as the second match. Because it had it listed as the second match. And then the third match was I mean, that's whenever I figured out that I should probably watch them. Like, if it was numbered 1 through 12, I should probably watch them 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, counting up, rather than counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for some stupid reason. So, anyway, this first one that I watched was Akiyama versus Vitor Belfort. Before coming off the title fight for Anderson Silva, he lost. Then he's not the champion here. That's why he's not the champion here, rather. Belfort is what I mean. Vitor Belfort lost to Anderson Silva before this fight. Belfort rushes the small Japanese man and catches him off guard when charging him into the cage, winning by TKO in 1:52 of the first round. So a minute 52 of the first 5-minute round. All 9 of his UFC wins have come with no judges having to make a decision. And, you know, I really didn't know what to do here. I was watching this and then I was like, wow, should I rate it 1 out of 5 stars? And then I thought, no, I shouldn't. And that's not what I'm going to do this entire time. Just because I feel as though that to rate a UFC fight 1 through 5 is sort of... I think not every fight's going to be an absolute, you know, juggernaut of a banger. And on top of that, comparing the UFC to the WWE, you know, the WWE is very showboaty, if you will. There's a lot of things that happen that are supposed to dilute the waters of what entertainment is. Like, for instance, I've talked about before how I've seen The Undertaker shoot lightning from his hands, and not necessarily his hands, but, you know, if he's in an arena, lightning just drops out of the sky. Or he's moved the ring without actually moving the ring. And if you don't know it, like a wrestling ring weighs about, I'm going to assume, 2,000 pounds. With all the boards and all the... I mean, the fact that it takes probably 5.5 to 6 hours to put up probably should tell you something. But anyway, the first fight, I shouldn't say matchup rather, is Paul Bradley versus Huffy L. Natal, I guess. Paul Bradley is apparently coming up, according to commentary rather, the 7th season of The Ultimate Fighter. Okay, Paul Bradley is apparently coming off of the win, of course, being the winner for The Ultimate Fighter. Apparently when I contract to fight UFC. Apparently when I don't know why it says that. That makes no sense. The Ultimate Fighter, in my own opinion, was very boring. Having to sit through all of the drama, what they would try to build as a fight between two coaches of the opposite teams. As an example, we'll go for Josh Koscheck versus George St. Pierre, two opposing coaches at the end of The Ultimate Fighter of two coaches themselves would face off against one another, regardless of which coach took home the victory of whose fighter ended up in the finals or becoming the winner, rather, of the contest known as The Ultimate Fighter. The reason I couldn't stand The Ultimate Fighter is because they tried to make it like it was a much anticipated bout between two coaches, when in fact it wasn't at all, because you would have to wait a good 90 days and then you would have to order a pay-per-view for $80+ just to see a what they would consider to be a much anticipated bout, regardless of whose fighter. Like, each coach had a team, right, of like, I guess 10 guys, and then upon those 10 guys they would rank them, 1 through 10, and then at the end of like the 90 days or the 8 weeks or whatever it was that everyone would get voted off the island, so to speak, you would take your number one fighter who's, been trained by you this entire time or been learning off of you, and that's a representation of you from The Ultimate Fighter. Like, let's say Quentin Rampage Jackson, and then Tito Ortiz is number one fighter. And then what they would do is they would put those number one ranked fighters against each other, and then those two coaches would also face off on the same event that those two fighters would face off. And if there was any consistency whatsoever, which I'm going to assume that there wasn't, but if there was any consistency whatsoever, then the same team should end up winning twice. As I stated before, Josh Koscheck and George St. Pierre, I remember that one because it got ordered on pay-per-view for me. And I remember sitting down watching Josh Koscheck just get his ass handed to him. And in the Ultimate Fighter, he would always say stuff like, "Oh, I hate French people. Oh, I hate French people. Oh, French people disgust me." And for those of you who don't know, GSP, George St. Pierre, is French Canadian. I mean, if they disgust you so much, why'd you let this one beat you? Oh my God, he beat him so bad that his eye was swelling up. Like, if you guys haven't seen that fight, I'm not sure whether it's their first or their second fight, but I do remember his eye just being so, almost like a baseball on the side of his head. But anyway, I guess I'm getting off topic here. Paul Bradley had won the 7th season of The Ultimate Fighter, and Huffy El Natal, I think is his name. Almost the first half of the first round, Bradley is starting to show signs of weakness. He's bleeding from his nose from a jab that he took about 30 seconds into the fight, and his leg is starting to swell up. So on commentary, they keep bringing up the fact that his leg is starting to just swell up, and it is, because this guy keeps kicking him. Every third, fourth, fifth, or eighth kick that you hear from this man getting kicked, he is just teeing off on his leg, almost like trying to make it harder for him to stand. I'm so curious to know, the guy who's kicking the other guy, how come his leg doesn't start to swell up? You know, because you're kicking him, and obviously there's damage being done to his leg. So why isn't the damage being shown? Like, how come there's no recoil? You know? How come it's only damage to one guy's leg? About 30 seconds into the fight, his leg starts to swell up because his opponent is throwing extensive amounts of leg kicks. This is not a good mixed martial arts debut for the Ultimate Fighter winner, Paul Bradley. Bradley keeps trying to take down Nepal, but his takedowns are getting stuffed, and as I earlier mentioned on commentary mentioned that there was a welt starting to build on his leg. Nepal keeps kicking him in the thigh, is starting to swell up really bad. There's a red place. We are nearly at the end of the first round. Trying to break up a scuffle between the two competitors, Bradley got poked in the eye by Nepal, and the ref called both men to the corners. Nepal kept throwing these leg kicks in 20 seconds left of the second round, and Bradley almost got folded over like a lawn chair. So they showed it in slow motion too, whenever Nepal went for a leg kick, and then Bradley was about to lunge at him looking for a takedown, I'm assuming to almost save face. Like, he felt himself slipping, and then he was like, oh no, I gotta do something to score a few points on this man. I've gotta take him down. And then afterwards he's, trying to take him down, and then he just buckles, almost like his knee buckles underneath him. Probably because he's being kicked right in the leg, right between the leg and the thigh area. Almost folds over like a lawn chair. Doing so, he's trying for the takedown, and Nepal, and probably because he's becoming increasingly hard to stand on his 2 feet right now, because for 2 rounds this man has had almost nothing but he's doing almost nothing but playing a game of keep away. He's playing a game of keep away with him. Bradley is a 2-time All-American wrestler from Iowa. I think they said, why doesn't he use that background instead of trying to box with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist? I can't read today. I don't know why. Nepal went for a spinning back fist, and Bradley ducks under and goes for a takedown attempt, but it gets countered. Nepal, having his takedown stuffed, looking visibly frustrated, and according to commentary, there was another poke to the eye, but the referee doesn't call this one. They go 3 rounds, and to me it looks like Nepal won this one, but we will take it to a judge's decision. And I didn't write down who won. Great. Nam Pham versus Mike Brown. Right off the bat, I just want to say that Mike Brown has to be the most generic name that I've ever heard. But apparently this man is 2-4 in his last 6 fights. That's not a good win-loss ratio. So the win-loss ratio would be 2-6. Your batting average is less than half at this point, and you need to reevaluate your life decisions and start focusing more on your fights. Maybe I don't know anything, and maybe he's had a few tough opponents. I'm going to go ahead and quote Triple H here in saying that in life you have two choices: adapt or perish. Nam Pham was a part of the Ultimate Fighter season 12. And apparently he was the runner-up. Around the first minute of the fight, Travis Brown, the most generic name I've ever heard, has Nam Pham on his back up against the corner, is giving shots to Nam Pham, essentially trying to wear him down. It looks like an attempt to get double underhooks from the mounted position, but Nam is fighting him off with one arm and one leg. The other arm and other leg Travis Brown has disabled on Nam Pham, according to Joe Rogan on commentary. Now, from this point on, I will be referring to both fighters as their last names. Brown was able to control a majority of the fight, at least through the first round. He was able to keep Pham on his back and isolated parts of his body, trying to get double underhooks in the mounted position. Now, I think I see why Brown is 2 for 4 in his last 6 fights. This man gives up too easily on his wrestling game. He gives up too easily on the most base wrestling that he was shooting for, and just had way too many missed or stuffed takedowns. It's not too hard to pivot your hips, torque your hips, pivot your hips, twist your hips, and torque your hips to gain a dominant position when you have your hands clasped around the waist of your opponent. That's all about torque of your hips. It's called a suplex, but this man wouldn't know anything about a German suplex. Round 2 was easily a Nam Pham victory, because he kept stuffing and countering every takedown that the other guy, Travis Brown, would try to connect with. Mike Brown. But apparently it went the distance. It went 3 rounds, and Mike Brown won via decision, which is not something that, because Mike Brown may have won that first round, but those other 2 rounds were definitely won by someone else, Nam Pham. Mike Brown wins via decision, which I really didn't agree with, because Mike Brown may have won round 1. He may have the victory on round 1, but those other 2 rounds, Nam Pham was basically stuffing his takedowns at every turn, was basically just not letting this man have any sort of offense whatsoever, and playing defense so well. And if you know what I know about the UFC judges, it's the fact that they're supposed to judge it on a certain criteria. And at least 2 to 3 of those criterias, including footwork and octagon control, was nothing but Nam Pham. He took a W in all of those areas, in my own opinion. And Joe Rogan even agreed with me. He even said on commentary, what kind of fight were they watching? Johnny Hendricks and Mike Pierce. Okay, almost 90 seconds left in the round before anything remotely entertaining happens. Sure, it was a fight for the UFC. Sure, it was a fight in the UFC, and sure, they were trading blows and looking to get a dominant position on one another. Funniest thing about this fight happened at around a minute 12 seconds remaining on the clock. Someone keeps screaming cheeseburger. I don't know if it's the coaches from one of the corners, and I don't have the full context on what exactly that's supposed to mean. One person compared the other Mike Pierce, for instance, looked like he's out of shape. Oh, okay, they could be saying that he's out of shape, maybe. They were calling him out for being fat, like, think about a cheeseburger. And I put that in quotes here on my notes. Quotes on my notes. Quotes on my notes. Could have been what they said. Seconds after I'm taking these notes, the same guy, I'm assuming it's the same guy, said, double cheeseburger. Is that a contest? Oh, is there a contest to see what most random shit you can say on a fight pay-per-view? If TikTok were around in 2011, which is when this whole entire card took place, I bet you would all think the double cheeseburger challenge you would all be doing the double cheeseburger challenge during an MMA fight, UFC, and cheeseburger would be hashtagging together. Someone said cheeseburger eat this time. I know this is a fight, and I'm trying to look for any and all positions so that I could take notes on what I'm observing, but not to say that this has been a boring fight, because there have been exciting points, but nothing that's really happened to be the most exciting part. Possibly has to be this guy who keeps yelling about cheeseburgers. Referee calls a timeout because there is a kick to the face, and apparently you're not allowed to do that from a grounded position. Johnny Hendricks kicked Mike Pierce. Mike Pence is the fucking what is he, like a he's the vice president of Donald Trump, I think. Anyway, the referee calls the timeout because there's a kick to the face, and apparently you're not allowed to do that from a grounded position. John Hendricks kicked Mike Pierce in the face. And when warning the fighter who did it, he tells him that he's not allowed to do that. John Hendricks in the fight, the fighter in question, said, I thought that I kicked him in the shoulder. And yet another judge's decision, and honestly, I don't know who to give this fight to. It seemed like a stalemate all 3 rounds, and I want to know what the code for a cheeseburger is. What does that mean? Is he just calling one of the fighters fat? Johnny Hendricks wins. Okay, so this first guy, I cannot say his last name because it's Minjuar, something of that nature. But Ivan Minjuar versus Nick Pace. Ivan accidentally kicked Pace in the nuts, and the ref calls for a timeout for the time being. And in doing so, they get separated. So it was probably around 30 seconds into the fight beginning. Nick Pace paced the fight, that both men trading blows. Pace gets a good position and really surprises Joe Rogan with all of the extensions, because Rogan thought that Ivan would have the advantage, but Pace surprised Joe Rogan's expectations because Nick was almost successful in choking out a veteran in the sport and passing his guard on the ground. Into the first round, not the first down. What is this, football? Into the first round definitely should be awarded to Nick Pace. I didn't see a point in the second round. Allow me to try to reiterate what I'm trying to say. I didn't see what Nick Pace was going for. Around 20 seconds left in the second round. Because he's been playing defense all round, was Nick Pace. And then he started to make some moves and take his opponent, who at this point was probably exhausted from hitting him or trying to hit him all round. He took him to the ground and imposed his will on an exhausted Ivan Gojavara, or Gijavora, Minjavara. I think is what his name is, Minjavara. And I didn't see that Pace was trying to exhaust his opponent to make him easier for him to dominate or take down to a dominant position, but it may have cost him that round. First half bleeding into the second half of the round, Pace gets kicked in the nuts yet again, in the balls. Ouch. Us boys can relate to that. With only 30 seconds remaining, it's speculated that Ivan got hit so hard that his eye started to swell up and that he couldn't see out of his left side. And the fight went to the judges' scorecard. And if they were watching the same fight as I was, the two rounds should go to Nick Pace. One, which should be round one, the first round, and the third round should go to Nick Pace. The crowd's booing, hearing Ivan wins, and Joe Rogan says he disagrees. I'm shocked. What are these judges smoking? That's not what Rogan says, but that's what I say. What are these judges smoking? Ivan Gojabara should have only won. He should have only took the victory, rather, at the second round. Ronnie Yaya versus Chad Mendez. Not even 45 seconds into this fight, and we get another dick kick. Accidental, of course. But still not a good look as far as the UFC goes. Joe talks about Ronnie Yaya's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu being at a top level, despite the fact that he's a small guy. Implying that he's not got much power. He can still make you tap out most submissions wrestling, and here's where I had a problem with what Joe Rogan was saying here. Absolutely had a problem with what Joe Rogan was saying here. Just give me a second to cover up for a second, because it is cold. Most submissions wrestling, it doesn't have anything to do with power, little to anything to do with power. Of course, I'm splitting hairs here because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submissions wrestling, I'm sure, are two sides of the same coin, but I'm sure that there is differences. Joe seems not to understand something that I've understood for a long time, that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling have one thing in common, and that's that you don't need a lot of power. All you need is the proper technique. Wrestling is built off of a foundation of technique and has little to nothing to do with power. Sure, it might help that you have the power in the base of those muscles to back it up, but it's not needed to get the job done. Round one, Mendez wins. He was the guy who was dictating the pace of the fight, stuffing the counters, the takedown attempts, and Joe talked about how amateurish Yaya's stand-up game is. And it showed here. The majority of the fight stays on the ground and is controlled by Chad Mendez, who, according to commentary, is playing a dangerous game with Ronnie Yaya because he is an expert Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist, and he could possibly make Taz Mendez tap out at any point. If Mendez is not careful, he could lose his undefeated streak of 10-0. The crowd is booing because the action is slowed down. Chad Mendez wins via a unanimous decision. Alexander, I could not pronounce his last name, it's like Gustafsson or something, versus Matt Hamill. The crowd starts chanting USA. Alexander is from Switzerland, so they're more than likely chanting that for Matt Hamill. And Joe brings up on commentary that even though they're chanting that to the American, he's deaf and he can't hear them, which is kind of rude to say that. But he literally says it in a degrading way, too. He's like, no, it looks like the crowd is chanting USA. And then Mike Goldberg says, yeah, probably for Matt Hamill. And then, for whatever reason, Joe Rogan just says, well, it's too bad he's deaf. And then it's like, wow, just shit on him, why don't you? Round one was Alexander looking for an opening, but getting it, he could, pacing around the Matt Hamill, and Hamill was landing strikes on him and opening him up at one point. A little more than the halfway point of round two is this fight to an end because Alexander rushes at Hamill and caught him, got him up against the wall of the cage, just pounding him, and got him to buckle after a flurry of shots. Your winner, Alexander Gustafsson, whatever his name was. The Switzerland native. Roy McDonald versus Mike Pyle. Pre-fight interview, Roy McDonald sounds really confident whenever he's talking about the game plan that he's got for his opponent, Mike Pyle. In case you couldn't tell, I was being sarcastic because for the pre-fight interview, he talks in a very monotone voice, as if he has no charisma. He's like, I'm gonna take him to the ground, and I'm gonna make him pay for being my opponent tonight. You know, like, goddamn, kid, put some bass in your voice. TKO, thanks to the fact that Mike Pyle kept going on his back daring the younger Roy McDonald to get on him, and he was able to overwhelm his opponent from the ground. So his opponent, Mike Pyle, just kept, like, for some reason, without taking Roy McDonald down, what he kept doing was he kept just laying down and then saying, hey, why don't you come into my guard? Why don't you you know, it was almost like he was laying down and then asking him to join him so that he could work some of his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu magic, I guess. I don't know how to put it, but he didn't want to stand up and box. Roy McDonald wanted to stand up and box, and Mike Pyle didn't want any of that. The only thing that Mike Pyle wanted to do was like lay down and then say, hey, come here. Just get on your hands and knees and come here. Because he kept doing what Joe called, like, I don't even know what to call it. The butterfly guard, I guess. I don't know. So one of these guys, well, actually both of them, look eerily similar, and I don't mean that in a racist way. Really, I don't, because one of them is from Greek and one of them is from America, and they're just both tall, bald, white guys. They just have that generic look to them. And I didn't even catch the one guy, the Greek guy's name. Costa, I think it is what they were calling him. Okay, so Costa versus George. Oh, Jorge. I'm so sorry. It's Jorge. First round over, and I think this one had a little two real big impactful moments. Had little to no real impactful moments, and the crowd starts booing both men near the end of the 5-minute round. Second round, a lot of grappling, but I don't see who to give the round to because the fight went back and forth. Near the end of the fight, Joe Rogan almost had a stroke trying to yell at one of the fighters. The Greek guy that I further mentioned, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, yell at one of the fighters, trying to tell him, you know, he's like, you can win the fight. You can win. The win is right there. He's like pointing at the octagon almost like, he's like, I know what to do. I know how to win this fight. And he kept saying that too. The win is right there. In a submission maneuver that was attempted called the omoplata, the way Joe gives directions on commentary sounded way too complicated. Like, I've never heard of an omoplata. That's never been a submission maneuver that I've been fairly familiar with at all. So I myself wouldn't know anything about how to attempt one. Joe giving directions on commentary makes it sound very difficult maneuver to pull off. Something about wrapping their hands around your feet and then setting up and grabbing their waist, I don't see exactly how that would apply pressure to any part of their body. But maybe I'm missing something, and I'm sure that I am, because it it sounds like a Greek move, an omoplata. But this guy had like all the hooks in, according to Joe Rogan, and he's yelling at him. He's saying, and keep in mind, it's like the second round. He's like telling him, all you have to do is set up and grab his waist. And then I'm like, Joe, calm down. If I had to pick a fight of the night thus far for this one, would have went to both men for equal parts action, equal parts exhausted at times, but only because they've been kicking the holy hell out of each other. This has been a boxing match, at times a grappling match, at times a wrestling match, at times, and both men are scored considerable amount of points on each other in each of their respective categories. Dennis Hallman versus Brian Eversole. The fight started, the crowd starting to boo loudly, and Dennis Hallman starting to take the fight. Started this fight by taking Brian Eversole to the ground early. Just started to take control of the fight, take control of him, and grappling him in all directions to take him to the ground, keeping him there to assert a certain dominance in the early half of the round. The fight ends in the first round when Eversole TKOs Hallman, because not only this guy came out, right? And then he thought, okay, now it's time that I fake a pump kick. And then once he was trying to dodge for the kick, his opponent was, once Eversole was trying to dodge for the kick, I think it was, well, I took poor notes, man. Oh my god. Okay, once Eversole was trying to dodge for the kick, Hallman took him to the ground. And he tried to basically get his back, but he wasn't able to because Eversole was able to get up, and whenever he was getting up and fighting off all of the choke attempts, as well as all of the submission attempts that this Brian Hallman was trying to put on, once he got him down, he basically wailed on him for a considerable amount of time, but it took him the better half of almost all round, because there was like 30 seconds left in the round whenever Eversole TKO'd Hallman. Okay. July 7th, 2007. UFC 73. UFC 73 ends in a draw contest as Rashad Evans versus Tito Ortiz for a shot at the light heavyweight championship. The first bout was essential battle for seeing Tito, and Rashad Evans had a huge grappling match between the two. Rashad won and did so in quick fashion. The second round, whenever I say the first bout, I guess I meant the first round, because the first bout that they had ended in a no contest or a draw because the judge's scorecard scored it exactly even. But that was in 2007. The second round was more of the same story. Rashad Evans basically taking control of the round, rather, knocking Tito down and keeping him down. Funny thing, though, whenever Tito would start to make a comeback, no matter how small that it was, the crowd was absolutely started to go unglued. There was this one in the belt in round 2. Oh my God, what the fuck am I saying? Tito had a guillotine applied, but he couldn't find the leverage because he wasn't in full posture, according to Samoa Joe. Tito almost had a guillotine on Rashad Evans, but according to Joe Rogan, he didn't have the full leverage, so he couldn't get the full capacity of the guillotine. According to Joe Rogan, and when Rashad Evans was trying to take control of the round even further, there was one point where Tito almost had an ankle lock or a leg submission, such as a leg bar of some sort, but Rashad Evans was able to get away from Tito quickly enough to apply, to stop him from applying existential pressure. The crowd was making the most noise during this bout in particular, and I can see why. A long-awaited rematch that these two have had, and it's 4 years in the making, and this was anticlimactic because it ended in the second round whenever Rashad Evans had Tito down and absolutely was just beating him up. Man, I did a pretty poor, I did this one dirty. Sure, I did I would call this an entertaining podcast, for a UFC fight or whatever. I didn't rank it 1 through 5, and I didn't really have a lot to work with either, because a lot of these just went to, draws or no contests. Or, judge's decision. There was nothing really, too exciting, I guess you could say, that happened. At least I don't think. Maybe one day we'll revisit a UFC fight, because I feel as though that I did this one dirty, and it wasn't my intention to do it like this. And I don't know what these judges were smoking sometimes. I also don't know what cheeseburger means. Why there were so many nut shots. Thank you all so much for joining me. Yeah, I guess that's the end of the episode, and I hate that. Thank you all so much for joining me. My name is Mocha. This has been the Gut Wrench Podcast. That's a wrap. Good night, everybody. Bang.